5 Live Drive.
Claire McDonnell and Tony Livesey.
Good afternoon, then. It is Drive on 5 Live with Tony and Claire. Now, the public inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal has been hearing its last evidence today after almost 4 years of testimony from 370 witnesses.
It's thought that up to 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis between 1970 and 1991 after being given a contaminated drug or blood transfusion.
An estimated 1,800 of those people died in what's being called the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. Des Collins is a senior partner at Collins Solicitors. He's advised 1,500 victims and families.
The desired outcome, strangely enough, I mean, people will say, well, it's compensation. It's not really compensation. Compensation is there, clearly, and if it's going to be paid, it's going to be paid. And if it's going to be paid quickly, then it should be paid very quickly. But I think they will all say to you, and they've all said to me at one stage or another, they want a full and frank apology from the government. The stories you've heard are tales of situations which should never have developed.
The inquiry will publish its recommendations this summer. One of the big questions it needs to answer is whether more could have been done to save lives.
Well, Richard Warwick is one of 32 surviving pupils from Trelaws College. 72 students from the college, all haemophiliacs, later died after being given contaminated treatment. Hello, Richard.
Good afternoon, Tony.
Richard, just reading that sentence out establishes the full horror of this story and the scandal. I can only imagine what it was like to be in the middle of all this. Can you, before we talk about where the study, where the inquiry is leading to and what might happen in the future, can you take us back to that time and what happened to you?
Okay, well, I was sent there as a young child, 10 years old, to this amazing disabled children's college in Hampshire, as you say, Trelaws, that specialised in care for haemophiliacs. And while I was down there, I contracted hepatitis B, HIV, and hepatitis C. We didn't really know what was going on at the school. We assumed that the treatment we were being given was, the different treatments we were being given were normal. We were having up to 2 blood tests a day. And we sort of, we all talked about this at great length and why they're taking so many blood tests from us. And it wasn't until later that we've discovered, certainly through, more recently through the inquiry, just how extensive this essentially research was being undertaken. They were testing different types of factor VIII out on us, and then taking our blood and seeing what changes there were. So essentially, we've been used as guinea pigs.
How old were you at the time, Richard, and how soon in this process did you realise how catastrophically things had gone wrong?
I think it was when we started to lose school friends. I remember on a couple of occasions after long breaks, summer and Easter come to mind. On two particular occasions, 2 lads never came back out from holiday. So we realised something was seriously wrong. We didn't really dare question the doctors and the nurses that were down there at the Hemophilia Centre. I mean, after all, they acted in, I think the term is loco parentis. They acted as our guardians, our parents, when we were away from home. And with it being a boarding school, of course, it was the ideal testing ground to keep an eye on young children that they were trying these different products out on, these different variations of products. It was ideal.
The horror is plain for all to hear. But one of the most moving things about all this, Richard, is I've seen some of your testimony, and you talk about, because you gave evidence 3 or 4 years ago to the inquiry, and I know you were there today, but you've talked about the guilt you feel because you survived.
Yeah, survivor's guilt. It forms a huge. Whenever we meet up as survivors, and just like today, 5 of us have appeared here, we all look at each other and we think about the boys that we've left behind, that we've lost, the good school friends that we've lost, and it is rightly survivor's guilt. We all question ourselves and ask ourselves, why are we still here? What did we do differently? Did we do anything differently, or was it just fate? But yeah, it's difficult to live with. But I mean, I try and occupy myself as much as I can, and have done over the past 20 or so years, by gathering other people's stories together, their testimonies, the little events like going on a radio program such as this, their local radio station, news bulletins.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be plenty of people listening to this, Richard, totally unaware of this till this interview. But believe you me, and I know it's dominated your life. How has it materially affected your life, Richard? What happened to you?
Well, it's prevented us, my wife and I, from having a family, because we were told in no uncertain terms when my wife did become pregnant that she had to have the child immediately aborted because of the risk to the child of HIV. Of course, there were no tests available at the time, so we had to do that. Sadly, that was the last chance we had to have children. It's made it unable for me to get a job, to get life insurance, travel insurance, all the little things that would come normally to a healthy adult. And it's basically, it defined my life as the whole scandal, for want of a better way of putting it. It's exactly what it is, as we now.
And what's the overriding emotion that you felt over the years? Has that changed as the inquiry's gone through the process?
I think the inquiry has been brilliant. I cannot find any fault whatsoever. They've been so accommodating. They've never been, they can't do enough for you, or as is the case, the inquiry's finished now, but yes, they've moved heaven and earth to make us feel comfortable, and they put the victims at the heart of the inquiry. We've heard some horrific evidence from victims. We've heard some horrific evidence from health professionals and politicians. But it's brought it out into the open, something which the government closed ranks around, the lie that they gave us the best possible treatment that was available at the time. We now know that isn't not the case.
And interestingly, Jeremy Hunt, who's now Chancellor, of course, and the former Health Secretary under the Conservatives, he talked at one point about how state institutions can, and I quote him now, can close ranks around a lie. So do you think, without naming any individuals, do you think that is what happened? There was, if you will, a corporate governance here of where people made the decision over a series of decades that the truth should not come out?
Very likely. In fact, I would say certainly yes. It was very convenient from one government to pass that lie from one party to the next. No matter whether it was Labour, Conservative, or whoever was in power, it was just pure convenience that they could stick to that lie and that line that we were given the best treatment available at the time. There was no alternatives. Young children that were injected with given factor VIII, the commercial clotting protein for haemophiliacs, they should never have been given that. It was pulled from tens of thousands of donations from people that were paid in America to give their blood. So you've got drug addicts and prostitutes, and people that were desperate for money would sell their blood. It was all mixed together, and if one donation was infected with a virus such as HIV or hepatitis, everything would be infected. The whole batch would be contaminated, and it was injected into children's veins. A 7-year-old boy died of AIDS.
The Labour Mayor of Manchester, former Health Secretary himself, Andy Burnham, he's talked on this subject. And interestingly, just as a caveat to what I'm about to say, there was a letter in the inquiry, Richard, that was published from 1983 with somebody from the UK's Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre writing to the government to say stop these blood transplants because the blood donated from the USA should be withdrawn. So that is a question of who knew what and when. And the reason I mention that is Andy Burnham, while saying that you and others like you have been comprehensively failed, he suggested that there may even be a case for charges of corporate manslaughter in the future.
Indeed, I heard that. I was actually at the inquiry when Andy Burnham spoke, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. He said as much in a debate in Parliament the day before he actually retired and became mayor of Greater Manchester, I think it was.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, the NHS and haematologists and other health professionals were warned not only by the group that you mentioned, but also the World Health Organization on 2 occasions not to use concentrated products derived from large pooled donations, especially if they've been paid for.
Yeah, Richard, we're kind of coming to the end of this, and after listening to your story, I realised that this next question could sound a little trite because it's about the future and compensation and things like that. But I realise nothing can compensate you for what you've been through with your family. You've outlined that eloquently to us today. There have been some payouts of £100,000 each to some victims and families. Going forward, what is money can't change everything, but you presumably you feel you should be compensated. But also, do you feel a sense of justice at all today? Difficult question. I don't like the word compensation, to be honest. I prefer the word redress. Yeah. For failures, with respect to failures of the government, and I don't like the word compensation. There's no amount of money, to be honest, that can. There's no magic bullet that can give us our health back. A financial settlement would help a great deal. It will buy nice things, but as I say, it won't ever bring our health back. There are some very wealthy people in this world that are pretty miserable. So it will help. It will help our family, my immediate family. It won't give us a child. We won't be able to have a child because of £100,000. And it won't bring my health back, but it will help. It will make life more comfortable. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and your aim to spread the word, you've certainly achieved that. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Richard Warwick, one of the survivors from the contaminated blood scandal. That inquiry that began in 2018 has heard its last evidence today. We'll return to this story later in the programme. It's Drive with Claire and Tony. It's 4:20.
A man who survived one of the worst contamination scandals in the history of the NHS has told Drive it's left him unable to have a family or get a job. Richard Warwick contracted hepatitis and HIV after being given contaminated blood products in the 1970s. He's been speaking as the public inquiry into the scandal hears its last evidence.
There's no magic bullet that can give us our health back. A financial settlement would help a great deal. It will help our family. It won't give us a child. We won't be able to have a child because of £100,000. And it won't bring my health back, but it will help. It will make life more comfortable.